Hello and welcome to another Nightgeist Gaming video. This is a battle report with the Aeldari versus the Chaos Knights. This battle report's a bit of a quick and dirty one. It's not edited as much as the last battle report, but this is one that I've been having requested quite a bit, and a lot of people have been asking about this, and so I wanted to get this out as quickly as possible, and so it has not been edited as much, but I do think that it was a battle report worth showing to kind of get an idea of how we can perform into the Knights. Now, the Chaos Knights and the Imperial Knights are quite different, and so that is going to be a bit of a different matchup. But in this matchup, I went against the list that's been kind of dominating some GTs and some tournaments, and it's the 5 big Chaos Knights and then a couple little guys. In the past, in the Index, I never really had too much issue with Knights, and I wanted to see how much things have changed, how much the detachments have done for them, the points changes. And I can definitely tell you that it has changed significantly. This is a much more interesting detachment, and it has some very powerful stratagems, and the Knights are really strong, and they have a bunch of wounds. So it's definitely changed things up quite a bit. And we're going to be running the same list that I've been testing, because I have also had some people ask whether or not 5 fire dragons is enough to deal with lists like this that have a bunch of, big knights, because a lot of people feel that Eldar kind of have 2 things. They have bright lances and they have fire dragons, and those are the only things that can really deal with the tough targets. But the list I've designed really is built to handle anything that the opponent throws at us. And it's designed to do damage into really any target, as long as you combine buffs and use the units efficiently. It often does plenty of damage. Even with that said, I was concerned about the amount of damage that we could do to things like the big Chaos Knights. And so this was going to be a major test to the list to see if it really could handle whatever the opponent throws our way. So before we get into the battle report, I just wanted to announce a couple things. I've been having some people ask about coaching, and I am coaching some students, and I'm probably getting to a point where I'm getting to sort of my time limit as far as the amount of students I can have right now. And so I'm going to be setting up a monthly call, like coaching call, to anyone that supports me in Patreon at the aspect tier or higher. So basically it's a $10 at the Patreon. And that way I can reach more people and do some coaching. And it's probably going to be geared more towards the beginner and intermediate players, talking about specific strategies, tactics, matchups, and also answering some questions. For those that want one-on-one coaching, I probably have about 3 more students that I could take on at my current workload. And so if that is something that interests you as well, I am setting up a website, nightgeistgaming.com. You can go there and sign up for the coaching, and I'll give you some information. I'll also send you a little PDF about 5 common mistakes that Aeldari players make, and kind of just go through a couple quick things on that as well, just for sending me your name and email, and then I'll basically respond to you, and we can talk about your goals and kind of look at what coaching may do for you. So I just kind of want to announce all that and let you guys know that I am continuing to try to work and grow in a way that is beneficial to those that are learning how to play Aeldari. I can also teach other factions outside of Aeldari, but Aeldari, of course, is my specialty. And so if you're coming over to Aeldari from other factions, or you're just getting started as a beginner, I have students at all different levels of competitive play, and am more than happy to work with you regardless of where you're starting at to help you reach however high up your goals are. So feel free to reach out, and you can contact me through either the website or the Patreon, and I look forward to hearing from anyone who would like to check that out and learn more about Aeldari. So that is it for announcements. So let's get back to the battle report and take a look at the list. This list will look familiar to those of you that have seen my other battle reports. We are sticking with this list, and this is something that I think players should do once you have a list and you've been able to kind of prove it, it's worked well for you in some games, stick with it for a bit and try it into more factions and really test it to see how it handles all sorts of different styles of play. This list has performed really well, and so I'm still testing it, and it is the list that is up on the Patreon. I updated to this list as my meta list because this is one I am going to be taking to tournaments, and as that is evolving, if the list changes due to the meta, it will be updated on Patreon. And if you're a free Patreon member, you can have access to that list. Of course, anybody that is any type of member can access that. So this is the current one, and of course that may change in a week or 2 weeks. I don't know. It'll be updated. But for those of you that have not watched or have not checked the list out, I'll just run through it real quickly. It is Eldrad, a Farseer with Torque, Fuegan, Lycus, Janezar, Baharoth, a single Warlock that goes with, in most of the time I would say, it can go by itself, but a lot of times it's going to be going with the Farseer and the Guardian Defenders. Then I have 5 Corsair Void Reavers, Guardian Defenders with a Bright Lance, Storm Guardians, Dark Reapers with a Missile Launcher, 5 Fire Dragons with a Fire Pike, Howling Banshees with Executioner, Striking Scorpion with Biting Blade, 10 Swooping Hawks with Hawk Talon, a Warwalker with Missile Launcher and Bright Lance, 2 Warlock Conclave with Spears, another 2 Warlock Conclave with Spears, Warlock Skyrunner with Spear, another Warlock Skyrunner with Spear, 5 Warp Spiders, Exarch with a Blade Array, and 5 more Spiders, Exarch with a Spinneret and Death Weavers. So that's the list, and again, it should look pretty familiar. So let's take a look at my opponent's list. All right, so my opponent took the Chaos Knights, and the detachment was the Lords of Dread. It is a really strong detachment. I think it's by far, from what I've seen, at least in the stats, the strongest of all the detachments, the Chaos Knights, and I can understand why after playing against it. It has some amazing stratagems and has a really interesting way of playing the primary game. The opponent took a Lancer that had a Blessing of the Dark Master. This enhancement gives it stealth, and it also allows it once per game to bring the damage of a weapon to 0. So makes it significantly harder to kill. The Lancer innately has a 4-up invulnerable save, and it also has more wounds than the other knights. So it is a very difficult knight to kill, sitting at 28 wounds with toughness 11 and a 4-up invuln. So yeah, that is the big tough guy. He then took 3 Despoilers, each with a slightly different loadout. The Thermal and Gatling was his Warlord, the one with a Thermal and Chainsword, and then he also took a Gatling and Chainsword. So a little bit of a mix. And then the last big knight he took was a Rampager that had the Throne of Mechanicum of Skulls, and that allows him to advance and charge once per game, and he also gets to reroll his charge rolls. He then also took 2 War Dog Executioners. So we have a total of 7 models and 7 units, and that is one of the major lists that I've seen winning tournaments, and in general is extremely strong into many, many factions. So with all that set up, let's take a look at the actual battle report and get into the deployment. Okay, so this is deployment. Again, we're on Tabletop Simulator, and the background hopefully makes it a little easier to see things. And I'll try to point things out real quickly here. But one thing to note the way the knights work now is they can now go through ruins basically as if they're not there. And if the ruin wall is over 4 inches, they have to roll a dice, and on a 1, they're battle shocked. But other than that, they can basically just walk through ruins. So they're much more difficult to really deal with in the sense of stopping them from just moving forward, because they also just walk over any units other than other Titanic units. So you can't really move block them in the traditional sense, and it's almost kind of like they have fly, but not only that, they can also get within engagement range of your models as long as they don't end in engagement range in their movement phase. So they can just walk right over top of you. It makes move blocking them significantly harder, and you kind of have to look at their actual distance they can move if you're trying to block and slow them down a little bit. but we are playing on WTC that has some really strange angles, and you can kind of see here there's some interesting lines across here. There's also a kind of open area like through here that I had to be careful of, and that's why you can see how I deployed kind of on that angle. And there's even a line that kind of runs through here that is pretty narrow but still there, and of course you can shoot down the edges of the battlefield on both sides. And so there's quite a few different open lanes in a sense of shooting, and there's even a bunch of shooting that can happen, you know, across the center as well. So if you can tell by the objectives, we're playing hidden supplies, and so we have an extra objective, and our home objectives don't score us points. So it is kind of an interesting primary. Now when I say it doesn't score you points, I mean you don't get points for holding it in and of itself, but you do score 5 points if you hold more objectives than your opponent at the end of your command phase. So your home objective does count towards the number of objectives that you're holding, so there is a bit of importance to it, but it's much less than in most of the other missions. So we have to really fight for these central objectives, and I think most everybody knows that Aeldari kind of struggle when it comes to holding objectives in No Man's Land. And this matchup will make it even more so than normal because these knights each have 12 OC, and so it's not going to be easy for us to put enough on an objective for just one of his knights to just move on it and take it away so that we don't score. So we're going to have a bit of difficulty there. A couple things to note with the knights, and I just want to point this out to you because it's things that you need to be aware of when you play against them. Not only do they move through buildings and all things like that, but if you're a shooting army, in turns 1 and 3 and I believe 5, I think is how it works. I think it's every odd round, battle round, they can get an ability, and if they choose it, they just get 1, but they can roll dice and they can get 2. What my opponent did, because he knew I have some pretty good shooting, was in essence, if you're shooting at the knights from over 18 inches away, they effectively have stealth. They're -1 to hit. And so it is a pretty strong ability for them just to have like army wide. And so that is kind of a tough thing to deal with if you're a shooting army. The Lancer up here is boxed. He also has stealth. And so even if I apply +1 to hit against him, if I'm shooting over 18 inches away, I'm still going to be -1 to hit because of the stacking of the abilities in a sense. Okay, the next big thing that I want to explain real quickly about how these knights work in this detachment specifically is as long as their warlord is alive, they can use a stratagem for free that allows them to sticky an objective. Now, that doesn't sound like anything crazy, but there's a lot more to this than just sticky objectives. For one, they can do it at the beginning of any phase. Now, that is important because what that means is they can do it multiple times in a turn or throughout the battle round. They can do it in their own turn. They can also do it in your turn. So at the beginning of the shooting phase, for example, they can sticky an objective. And then at the beginning of the charge phase, they can sticky an objective. In the beginning of the fight phase, they can sticky an objective. And so basically, if they have enough CP, they can sticky a whole lot of objectives. On top of that, they have a unique sticky objective mechanic where even when they are not on it, the objective acts as if it has an OC of 5 on it. So what that means is, even if we move our striking scorpions, for example, onto an objective that they have stickied, we can test it, but we don't actually control it. And so we don't take it away from them. If our striking scorpions then move to another objective, this objective would still be the Chaos Knight's objective, and they would be able to score on it. So you actually have to have more than 5 OC to actually make the objective go to yourself or go back to neutral, to where they would have to then try to sticky it again. So it's kind of like a super sticky, where you can't just tow another model on it and take it away from them and get rid of the sticky. You actually have to have 6 OC on there to do so. So it's very interesting to play against, because especially for us, where we don't have a lot of units that have a lot of OC. So I just wanted to point that out at the very beginning, so you can also kind of understand why my opponent is playing the way he does, and also why I had a lot of concerns with primary this game. But now that that's explained, let's go ahead and talk about deployment. Okay, my opponent has less models, so we'll just talk about his real quickly. He's got a despoiler up here. He's got one of the small war dogs, and he's got another small war dog back here. He's got another despoiler, and this one here is his warlord with the 2 guns. The other despoilers have some very strong melee with the chainswords. This is the lancer, like I mentioned before, who's got the 4-up invuln. He's got basically a super tank shock that he can do for free when he charges in. And then the rampager has one of the craziest melee profiles, has an insane amount of attacks, and hits really well. Absolutely brutal, and pretty much anything he touches in melee is going to just be annihilated. So major threat with the rampager. He also is the one that has that enhancement that allows him to advance and charge. So I have to be really careful about how I deal with these melee knights. So my opponent played very aggressively with his deployment because he knew how hard it would be for me to do much damage to these knights. And what I want to ask you as the viewer is, when you're deploying against somebody who does this, specifically against Chaos Knights or Knights in general, really think about whether or not you want to try to do damage to that Knight. Because the Lancer's sticking out here, probably going to be hard to shoot him without him being in cover, but you know, he is kind of in the open. I can probably get a lot of shots on him. I have basically everything on the board, and so, you know, I can move the Hawks to a point where they can shoot the Rampager. I can move some of my units. I have a Bright Lance in here that can either move out this way and get shots, or move up this way and get shots. We have our Dark Reapers lined up and ready to take shots down this way. We have the Warwalker that's ready to take shots down this way. So we have a lot of shooting we can do, but the question is, should you do it? And that is something that I do feel like a lot of Aeldari players struggle with, is at the beginning of the game having a plan and thinking about whether or not they want to play aggressively off the bat, you know, like turn 1, go Alpha Strike, do the damage you can, try to make your opponent fight their way into the middle of the board. But this is something that you really have to consider what's going to happen in the next turn and think a bit ahead as you make your plans and come up with your strategy. So he has no infiltrators. We have our striking scorpions sitting here. That way we can move them back into safety or move them somewhere else to be aggressive. Now, I did something that I haven't really done in many games, and I took fixed objectives, fixed secondaries, I should say. And I will say, I think fixed secondaries against this faction or against Chaos Knights, when they take 5 knights, they are all characters. So each one of these big knights is a character. So we have 5 characters that have a bunch of wounds and are vehicles. So to me, it seems pretty clear that one of the best things to do, if I am confident in my own firepower, is to take Assassinate and bring it down. Because every time we assassinate one of the large Chaos Knights, because each one is a character, that's 4 points. And it doesn't matter when we do it. We could, if we kill 2 knights in one turn, that's 8 points. If we just kill 1, you know, that's 4 points, but they can be done throughout the game. If we chip 3 knights down and get them low on wounds and then kill them all in one turn, you know, that could be a 12-point swing in secondaries. So very strong. But then not only are we scoring assassination for killing those units or those models, we're also scoring bring it down. And the knights have so many wounds, they give you 6 points. So every single big knight that we destroy is giving us 10 points in secondaries. He has 5 big knights. That means that it only takes us 4 big knights to max out our secondary. We're going to get 40 points if we just kill 4 of his big knights. To me, that just seemed to make the most sense, and I felt confident in the firepower of the list that I could kill at least 4 of the big knights throughout the game. And the little knights do count towards bring it down as well, but I figured I would just focus down 4 big knights and max out my secondaries. And so then it comes down to, well, we have to come up with how to deal with the primary. And I knew that was going to be very difficult. And that is why I believed my opponent was playing very aggressive with the Chaos Knights, because he wanted to get out there, get on objectives, and make it really tough for me to score primary. So our Void Reavers are sitting up here. They're ready to scout forward. And you can't see in this ruin, but I do have a different angle where you'll be able to see. But I have the Fire Dragons with Fuegan, and I also have Janezar with the Banshees in that ruin hidden. We have our Warp Spiders sitting here. And I believe Lycus was there as well. And then, yeah, that was the one with the Lycus. She's kind of sitting there. And then we had our Farseer with Brightlance sitting here. And with the Guardians. And then we had the Storm Guardians here. The Sticky, the objective. We still want to Sticky it again because of the way Hidden Supplies works. And then we have our Warwalker, of course. One of the Skyrunners, our Dark Reapers. And everything you can see is kind of just packed behind these 3 ruins. So inside this ruin, we had the Warp Spiders. And so they're all 5 just sitting in there. And then, of course, we have Baharroth and the Hawks, and they're sitting safely behind the ruin. And I did that just in case we ended up going second, that they could go up and then come down and do some mortal wounds. And I could get some decent mortal wounds off and maybe do the Unshrouded Truth trick with the Swooping Hawks. All right, here is the Fate dice that I rolled. And it's just fine. I mean, I figured I'd be using every single stratagem throughout the game. The only one I didn't want a whole bunch of were 2s. I didn't want to roll like 4 2s. But again, I have not been playing with Lucid Eye and really just never had an issue, because this list really just uses all of the stratagems basically every game, almost without fail. And so I almost don't really care what I roll here, but this is what I rolled just so that you know going forward. This was the scouting phase, and I ended up having to go first. And so I just scouted the Scorpions back, because there's no real use in just moving your Scorpions forward, because they're just going to die. And they're not stopping the Knight from moving anyways right over top. And so there's really no reason to try to like move block or do anything like that. I mean, I could put them here approximately where I think the Rampager may try to go, just to slow him down a little bit. But if he advances, then it doesn't really matter. And I'd have to kind of try to spread them out a little bit to do anything. And that's pretty much what you have to do to actually try to slow these Knights down. And so it's just not easy to do or necessarily super effective. And I didn't feel like it was so important that I wanted to waste my Scorpions. So I just scouted them backwards. The Void Reavers did scout forward so that we could move towards another objective. So now that I know I'm going first, and again, I have fixed objectives. I have Assassinate and Bring It Down. I know I'm not going to very likely be able to take out a Knight, but I do know that I want to start doing some damage to them before they get into my lines or get too close to me. And so what I'm going to do as a plan is we have these Void Reavers. They're going to move on to the point, and the Scorpions are going to be on a point, and the Scorpions can stay an inch off the wall, which is important because the Knights cannot charge through models or through ruins. They can only move, advance, and fall back. And so I don't have to worry about him charging through the wall. So staying an inch off the wall is still important. And it's the same thing with the Void Reavers. They're basically going to sit here, and this one's going to have to be within an inch of the wall. But what I want to do is force him to at least come forward onto these objectives if he wants to stop me from scoring. So this objective and this objective, because these two objectives are going to be basically, in a sense, my kill zone. So most of my army is sitting here, and then I also have some heavy hitters with the Fire Dragons sitting in here. And the Hawks, of course, can come down wherever I want. I only have Warp Spiders over here, and these guys are basically just to pick on an objective. But in reality, these Warp Spiders are not really going to be able to do anything this game. There's no targets for them to shoot and be effective into. And I'm not doing tactical missions. And so I realize that there's just not a lot that these Warp Spiders are going to be doing for me this game. So I'm going to have to think about ways to use them. But with my biggest part of my army, most of the points sitting centrally here, I figured if I can force him to come onto this objective or this objective, I can really try to dominate these two objectives with my firepower and make it difficult for my opponent to control them, or at least control them without me killing the knight that tried to stop it. And so that is basically, in a quick synopsis, my plan. And going first, I want to basically just wait him out. So this is another view showing, you can see here the fire dragons and banshees. We scouted the warwalker behind this ruin, and pretty much the whole army is hidden. So there's no shooting. If he walks into this ruin, there's no shooting here. If he walks into this ruin, there's no shooting here. There's really no way for him to shoot any part of my army really in the first turn, and I want to keep it that way. And I want to force him to kind of make the first move in a sense and keep everything hidden so I don't lose any important units, or really any units if I can, in his first turn. So this was my movement phase, and I hope I made you think a little bit about what your plan would be. A lot of times we can be really aggressive when opponents do things like this and put things sitting up front. We can Unshrouded Truth here, and we can bring units like the Dark Reapers here to shoot, and we can line up all sorts of different shots. But the problem is, if I put a bunch of things right here, that this knight is active, this knight is active, this knight can move here and then also be active. And there's no real way for me to attack his units without being very visible and easily hit back by basically his entire army. And one of the things about Eldar is figuring out a way to not get hit by the opponent's entire army, because we're just too fragile to do that. So how do we make it so that our opponent can't hit us back so hard? That is a question that you should be asking yourself, in a sense, when you're coming up with your strategy and what you're going to be trying to do throughout the game. How can I stop my opponent from engaging with all of his units on the turn that he gets to hit back? And basically what I'm saying is, in this turn 1, there's really no way for me to do that. There's no alpha strike I can do effectively that doesn't expose my army to, in essence, his entire army. And so if I got to the point where I could possibly kill one of these front knights, like the Rampager or the Lancer. So I kill one knight, that's 335 points. If most of my army is sitting here or here, when I do that, he is going to kill way more than 335 points on the hitback. In fact, he could easily kill half of my army on the hitback, because these knights are really strong. And if especially exposing some of my heavy hitters, like the fire dragons, those are obviously going to be his target number 1. So if he takes out my fire dragons and a lot of other important units like swooping hawks or the warp spiders with Lycus, if he's able to take those out, it's going to severely diminish my ability to kill the other big knights. And so we have to play really carefully here, force our opponent to spread out a little more so that we can figure out a way to stop him from shooting us with everything and then charging and killing even more. So this is another view of the movement. And as you can see, we lined up our Dark Reapers. It's kind of hard to tell exactly from this angle, but we have this nice little, I can't draw a straight line here, but we have this line straight to his Lancer with the Dark Reapers. We're going to go ahead and take shots because we have Psychic Shield that we can use if we want. And he knows that if he tries to line up any kind of shooting back. And he doesn't have actually that many really long range weapons. Most of his weapons are that 24, 36 inch range. And so the 48 inches of the Dark Reaper is actually pretty nice. But we did have to move him into the ruin to be able to get this shot off. And then we also got our Farseer Guardian Brick over here with the Bright Lance specifically taking this nice angle into the Rampager. Because again, if I can hit him with a few bits of long range firepower, I'm okay if he shoots me with his long range weapons. They're not going to do much damage to my Guardian squad, and then they can just fade back this way, so he'll only get one shot into him, and it won't be with very many of the weapons. And with the -1 to wound, I'm comfortable losing a few Guardian defenders because, again, their shooting is really not going to do much to the knights. So I'm not too concerned about losing a few Guardian defenders in exchange for getting this Bright Lance off, because the Bright Lance just is a very scary Bright Lance for knights, because if we hit and wound and they fail and we didn't have to use Branching Fate, we can push that automatic 8 damage through, and that's just brutal because that's almost a third of the knight's wounds. So we can actually cut these knights in a third of their wounds off with this Bright Lance reliably if it does go through their 5-up invulns. And so at the end of my shooting phase, I mean, of course we didn't kill anything, but we did 3 damage, I believe, to 3 or 4 damage. I can't remember now if the missile launcher hit and did 4 damage or if it was just one of the Reaper launchers, but one went through. I think it was 3 damage. I think it went down to 25 wounds, and then we hit the Rampager, and I believe we actually did 7 wounds with the Bright Lance because I did have to Branching Fate the wound roll, but it did do a lot of damage. He failed to save, and we got a 5 on the damage, so I think we did 7 damage right there and took it down to 19, which is not bad at all. And we also have our Bright Lance in a place to where he does have to be careful what he moves within 24 inches because we can overwatch with this thing, and it is a pretty good 24-inch threat, which I think the 24-inch bubble is something like this. And so that is something that a lot of opponents won't think about, but this Bright Lance is actually a 24-inch overwatch kind of monster against things like these vehicles, these toughness 11. It's pretty good because we can use Branching Fates to hit with the 6, and then we're wounding them on 3s, and now they're having to deal with another really powerful d6 plus 2 damage attack. All right, and so going into my opponent's first turn and their movement, of course, we didn't score any secondaries because we have Assassinate and Bring It Down, which we didn't even come close to accomplishing. So we score 0 for the first turn. The opponent moves very aggressive. They drew Assassination and Bring It Down and got rid of Assassination, I believe, and then he had Storm Hostile Objective. So he got onto the point here for Storming Hostile Objective, and he moved his Rampager up ready to advance and charge next turn. I know that threat is absolutely coming my way. He's also hidden behind a ruin pretty effectively. He kept rolling pretty low on his advance rolls, fortunately for me. So the Rampager actually, he was hoping to get onto this objective to stop me from scoring, but he just didn't have the movement. He just rolled too low on his advance roll. Now, he then moved his shooter here, and all of these despoilers have shooting, but this one, his Warlord, has the double guns. He's got the Gatling and the Thermal Lance, which is a whole lot of firepower. And so he's setting up this despoiler and this despoiler, and again, as soon as they're touching a ruin, they can shoot through it. So this despoiler's view is really like all of this. Like he can see in a massive cone just by touching this ruin. And this despoiler over here can pretty much see right along the line of this ruin, and then also everything through here basically until that ruin. And so he's got a big view as well. And so the view that these guys have is pretty crazy when they step on a ruin. Now, this one did advance. He wanted to make sure it got onto this point, so it's not going to be shooting this turn. And he did sticky this objective, and I believe he also stickied this objective. So like I said, they can sticky an objective at the beginning of any phase, and they can do it once for free per battle round. So they're going to definitely sticky at least one, and in all likelihood, they are probably going to sticky 2 objectives. Okay, so at the end of my opponent's turn, they did score the Storm Hostile Objective for 4 right here, and of course did not do Bring It Down. There's no way he could get line of sight on my little Warwalker back here, and that is why, again, you keep your Warwalker basically just completely safe, out of line of sight, until he's ready to help boost the AP against a target. And so there was nothing he could do about that, and scored 4 for the secondary. So now that our opponent has moved up, and he's done a really good job of protecting his Warlord, because killing his Warlord is kind of a big deal. If the Warlord goes down, he does not get the free stratagem where he can sticky an objective for free. So it's kind of a nice unit to be able to take down if you can, but he did a good job of keeping it completely surrounded. So he has a Rampager here, the other despoiler, and the War Dog. So there's no way I can bring the Hawks down with an 8 to be able to do the grenade, and he's got him protected from a lot of different things. There's no way I can get within 12 inches of him to be able to get the Warlocks into him, and he pretty much did a great job of protecting his Warlord. I do want to point out that he did come within 9 inches of this Warlock Skyrunner, and we did Isha's Fury on the Rampager, We also use our Bright Lance to overwatch this over here, and we actually did a pretty good amount of damage. And I don't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say it was like another 6 damage on the overwatch. He failed his 5-up invuln again, and so we were able to pick off a good chunk of damage onto this knight because of the overwatch from the Bright Lance, which was really nice. And there was not really anything he could do about it because he wanted to get on this objective, he wanted to sticky it, and he wanted this knight to be a threat for turn 2. So I don't know if it was really a bad play on his part, but fortunately the Bright Lance did wound, because we are wounding them on 3s, and we were able to do a good little chunk of damage there. And Isha's Fury did 4 damage to the Rampager. So now the Rampager's been hit by a Bright Lance and some damage has been done, and Isha's Fury has now hit him. He's actually been cut down, I believe, if I remember correctly, I think he was sitting at like 15 or 16 wounds. So we've actually done pretty good damage into this Rampager already before he's even had a chance to do anything. And again, that's just the power of this Farseer Guardian Brick's Bright Lance. Has already done a lot of damage this game. And then, of course, Isha's Fury is so good into this matchup. Anytime you can use Isha's Fury, basically, you should be hitting these knights with Isha's Fury and doing those mortal wounds. Goes right through their invuln saves, of course, and we just are able to do some good damage into them. And that is the reason I actually put this Skyrunner here, is to basically hide behind the ruin, and then when anything got within 9 inches, we'd hit him with Isha's Fury. So this is the situation, and I just want to pause here again. I really like to try to put you guys in and make you put your thinking caps on here. And this is a spot where I think takes a little bit of thinking. So here is where I think there's all sorts of mistakes that can be made. And this is a pivotal turn and a place where you have to really think about what you want to do, what your opponent's wanting to do, and how you can reach your goals. So this is kind of the dilemma. We have all the big knights have pushed forward, and he has his little knight screening out his home objective. So we're not really going to be able to easily take that out. And in one sense, it's not that important. Even if we kill this knight back here, this little guy, it's not actually scoring him any points on his home objective, really. He could also use his stratagem to sticky it at the beginning of our shooting phase if he felt like it was actually under threat. In which case, he then still gets to keep it that home objective until we can get more than 5 OC on it. So it's not feeling great to me to send something back here to kill this knight. For one, we could do it maybe back here where it's a little safer, but now we're getting far enough away that only certain units are actually going to be able to do much damage. The Hawks, for example, aren't going to be able to do their grenades from this far away. And if we get much closer, then we're just in firing lines for this knight. This knight, if we don't kill it. And of course, this one up here can also peek out and take shots. And so we're putting a unit in danger to maybe kill one of his little knights, but not really affect the game scoring at all, especially if he just spends 1 CP to sticky this objective. So I don't think he really has too much to worry about us coming in the back because of this primary. There's not really much reason for us to consider this kind of back play. So I'm already going to give that to you, that I don't think that this is really the best play, at least not at this stage in the game. And so with that out of the way, let's talk about the rest of the board state. He has a knight on every objective except for this one. And so we know we're going to score 5 on primary. Because again, the way it works, you score 5 if you hold an objective. You score another 5 if you hold 2 objectives or more, in no man's land specifically. Like I said, your home objective doesn't count. And then you score another 5 if you hold more objectives than your opponent. And with that count, your home objective is part of that counting process. So we know that, again, we're going to score 5, but we have to decide how aggressive we're going to play. We have to do something. And we have to stop our opponent from scoring and just completely blowing us out of the water when it comes to primary, because if he scores, if we don't do much this turn, or at least do something, then he's going to score, you'll have this objective, and this objective, and he will score 15 points on primary. And it would be really nice not to let him do that. But the problem is just how many knights he has in play. So he has this, again, despoiler that has great view of the board. He has this despoiler, which has a good view, a little bit tighter. And he did that on purpose, but basically he's got this and he's got this. So he can be a part of the fight next turn, if nothing else. And then, of course, this one here has a great view of a lot of the board as well. And even over this way and into even this ruin. And so he's got a lot of threats that have a lot of vision of the map right now. So how do we do something about this? Kind of think in your mind, how are we going to take out one of these knights? Because we need to try to kill something, and we need to try to not let him score max on secondaries. If he ends up scoring 10, we can manage that. But when your opponent starts scoring 15, and if they keep scoring 15, you're going to get so far behind that you can't come back. And so we do need to do something this turn. But the question is, how do you do it? And how aggressive do we go? Do we focus on one knight and just try to get, one of these front knights down? Or do we try to do something back here and just focus on like this knight? Maybe with Baharoth and the Hawks, and then maybe we get something over here with Uncharted Truth, or also something back here with Uncharted Truth, and try to just take out this knight. But then we do, because this is stickied, we do have to get at least 6 OC on this objective. For example, that could be one idea. Another one would be focusing on this knight, kind of in the same vein, trying to figure out how to get angles and see if we can just kill the knight. So before I continue on to the next turn, which is going to be my movement phase, I just really want you to think about this next turn, because this is where I think players will make decisions that either win or lose them the game. Because of how aggressive the opponent is, he's forcing you to make these decisions. And I think, if I'm not wrong, let me know in the comments if you feel like I'm speaking to you and this has happened to you, where you just don't know what to do. And you feel a little overwhelmed. It's like, how do I even begin to approach these 5 knights? Because all 5 of them, if I kill one of them, the other 4 are just going to absolutely slaughter my army. So how do I do this? And if you feel like that's something you've been through, I hope this battle report helps you, and definitely let me know in the comments if you've had that feeling before, because it is a pretty intimidating army when you're looking at these massive monsters of units that will just mow down our little infantry. So again, I'm speaking a little here a bit longer to try to give you some time. Feel free to pause it and just think about your approach. What units are you sending where? And how are you focusing one of these knights down? Or are you going to focus 2 knights? Or are you going to try to focus on 3 knights? And again, we've done a little damage to this knight, and we've done a pretty good amount of damage to this rampager. And we've done, I think it was 3 damage, like I said, to the lancer. And so we have some wounds on some. And so what do we focus on? And how do we stop our opponent from running us over in primary objectives? All right, guys, I hope you've kind of come up with a plan and you've thought about how you would approach a situation. And I'm going to share with you the way that I approached this next turn. So, and this is one of the coolest things about Seer Council. You can kind of see there is nothing in this whole part of the board. We don't have anything here anymore. Our entire army effectively is in this one little corner. And we are applying our full army basically into this area of the board, this area here. So Seer Council is so fast, and this is really one of our greatest strengths, is just absolute focus with our firepower. Now, we do have some units down here, but you'll notice that these units don't really do any damage. They're not there to do anything other than take the objective from the opponent, not let him score on this for his next turn. And it may seem kind of crazy, but think about it this way. we've just exposed, in essence, our entire army. Our entire army is now in play and is part of the attack. The striking scorpions and the warp spiders are going to do 0 to 2 damage probably to any of the things on this board. We just don't have the strength to hurt these knights, and we don't have the rerolls to do it either. We can use our aspect tokens. Like I said, we can chip them. We can do a dent, a wound here and there, but that's about it. So why not use them to lower our opponent's primary and force them, and in essence, overwhelm them with targets? Because now he has to decide what he does with this knight. Because if we didn't do this, this knight just helps shoot into some of these units over here that we would rather probably not die. But because we've done this, he now has some other issues to deal with, because he has this Warlock Skyrunner that can make him take battle shock tests, maybe just blank his OC. We have the Warp Spiders and Striking Scorpions that all have 3-up saves that aren't exactly the easiest things to kill. And so if he wants to get us off this objective and not be in fear of us actually scoring it, he's got to do something about this unit. And these units are basically our least valuable units. I mean, the Warlock Skyrunner, you could say, almost is more valuable than the Striking Scorpions and Warp Spiders because it can do Isha's Fury and things like that. But we have another one. So we are forcing our opponent to make decisions on his target selection. And that is why this happened down here, because we have 5 OC from the Scorpions, 5 OC from the Spiders, and then 2 from the Skyrunner, putting us right at 12. And that equals our opponent. So he is not able to score on this, and we contest it exactly, but we also don't own it ourselves. So moving along up the board, we have our Skyrunner hidden back here, again, to apply Isha's Fury and do other things later in the game. We don't need to expose both Warlocks. The nose of this one can see this guy, and obviously we can see this one. So we can pick one of these guys if we want to basically blank their OC and force their battle shock anyways at -1 and hope that they fail their battle shock so they have 0 OC. But that is kind of the idea there. Now moving up, our Warwalker peeked out, and so he's going to get a shot into the Rampager. We have our Dark Reapers lined up here, and they are actually able to shoot the Rampager, but also if the Rampager dies, they're able to take shots into this despoiler here, just in case, because the Rampager's already hurt, and so I have a feeling we're going to take it out pretty easily. We do have our Guardian Defenders that we Unshrouded Truthed right here, and we have our Storm Guardians right here. So Eldrad puts his +1 to wound. You can see the little tag there on the Rampager to try to help us take it out, because we have our Warlocks here and here focused into this guy. And so what's going to help them really do damage into this Rampager is +1 to wound. So the +1 to wound is pretty important to increase the effectiveness of our weapon significantly. We'll get a 50% damage boost with our Warlocks and their Destructors. And Eldrad's not actually too bad in this matchup. It's actually kind of funny. He ended up doing, I think, 3 damage himself to this Rampager because his Mind War is anti-character, and each one of these big knights is a character. So you actually hit on a 2, wound on a 4, and do d6 damage to these knights if they fail it. So it's actually not too bad at all. So Eldrad actually got a little damage in, which was fun, because a lot of times he doesn't get to do much in games. But he is dooming him, which is pretty important. Now our Farseer Guardians are here as well, but you'll notice the Farseer seems to be missing, but that's because it's kind of hard to see. Our Farseer is actually right here inside the ruin, and we have 2 Guardian Defenders here that are basically keeping her in cohesion, and this one is within 2 inches, either that guy or that guy, I don't remember. But so we have 2 within range of her, within 2 inches of her, and then this one's kind of like chaining us to the rest of the squad that's here. She is applying +1 to hit against this Lancer, and the reason is that I really can't afford for these Fire Dragons to miss, and the Lancer's stealth is going to make them hit on 4s, which I don't like, because even with rerolls, that puts us not doing great. Hitting on 3s is much better than hitting on 4s with full rerolls, and so the +1 to hit really needed to hit this guy. And so this is, again, a really important part of when you're coming up with how to deal with the army. You have to think about how you can counter specific units and the best way to go into units. And so this hopefully kind of shows you my strategy that I came up with this turn was basically, let's get +1 to wound on this guy so all of our destructors are going to be doing way more damage. And let's get +1 to hit on this Lancer because his stealth is a problem, and we want our fire dragons to absolutely melt him because they are all in melt range. So we just advanced our fire dragons here. And we kept them out of 6 inches because when these guys explode, they can do a ton of damage. We also put our Void Reavers right here, and there's 3 of them, specifically because they have OC2 each, and I have to get at least 6 OC on this objective because it's stickied. So by having 3 Void Reavers at 6 OC exactly, we're able to make sure our opponent doesn't score on this objective if we kill the Lancer. So that's another important piece, and actually I think these Void Reavers' value is in a sense gone up because they are going to help us into this matchup, specifically because of their OC, and we don't have a whole bunch of ways to get as much OC as these Void Reavers have. So they were actually kind of clutch in this matchup because I could just put 3 models on there and flip their stickied objectives, whereas a lot of my other units did not have the OC to do so. Baharoth and the Hawks have come down here, and Baharoth himself came down on this side of the ruin to shoot the Lancer, and I realized that was a mistake afterwards. I should have just put another Hawk out there. I just didn't have room for him. I should have put him in here because they're tall enough to actually see over this ruin and actually see this Rampager, and it would have allowed me to shoot either or depending on where I needed a little more damage. But they did come down here outside of 6, but within 8, so they could do the mortal wounds, and we did some mortal wounds into him. And if I remember correctly, we did exactly 5. We hit 5 on the nose, so we rolled, 5 dice above, 4 and above, and then 5 dice below. So we did 5 mortal wounds, which was great because that took him down from 25 wounds down to 20. So the Hawks are already starting to help us get damage into this Lancer. And again, this was very purposeful because this Lancer has a 4-up invuln, which is the best invuln on the team. So if I'm going to be putting mortal wounds into something, generally speaking, one way to think about it is the better the invuln save of the target, the more mortal wounds are generally going to be favorable or a better counter. And so I want to get mortal wounds into this Lancer because that 4-up invuln is just a problem. It just makes him much harder to deal with compared to some of the other knights. And the other thing is he can blank a damage. So instead of just putting these fire dragons and trying to Unshrouded Truth them somewhere where he can blank damage, I wanted to make sure they all got a melt range. Because if he blanks one of the D6 shots and I don't roll too well with these fire dragons, I still want the melt damage to go through, because even if he blanks the damage down to 0, the melt is added after the fact, and so we're still going to do the melted damage of the fire dragons, even if he blanks with his enhancement. And so again, that's a direct counter in a sense to that enhancement, and so that's why I made sure to line up my fire dragons in here when he put his Lancer over here. So that was part of the deployment phase. I didn't want to mention it because I didn't want to talk about what was going to happen in the future and give it away a little bit, but that is why the fire dragons were sitting in this ruin. As soon as he moved forward with his Lancer, which I figured he was going to go to that point, it was his natural objective to go to, we could advance the dragons in here, and he's so tall, he can't be on that point without our dragons being able to see him when they're in this objective. And so I knew we were going to be able to just absolutely melt him with the Meltas at some point in time in the game, and this seemed to be the turn where we just needed it to happen. You can also kind of see we have Lycus in the ruin here, and the other Warp Spiders are outside of it. The Warp Spiders aren't going to be really doing much damage, and I didn't care if they joined the fight, and this ruin got packed so full I really couldn't fit them. We wanted Lycus to shoot the Lancer so that the Swooping Hawks would get lethal hits on 5-ups, and that is why she made it into the ruin, just to get her shot off to boost the lethal hits on the Hawks. Now, You could say that's overkill, because we have the fire dragons, we have the hawks who came down, did mortal wounds, we have Lycus giving us lethal hits on 5-ups, and then we advance the dragons so they can't throw grenades, but the Void Reavers have grenades. And so we have another backup plan. If we shoot and he still lives with a couple wounds, we still have grenades. So if you think about it, we have the hawks, spiders, fire dragons, Void Reavers, all into the Lancer. We have both Guardian Bricks, along with possibly the Dark Reapers, Warwalker, all into the Rampager, who's already been wounded pretty badly. I also have Jane'Zar and the Banshees sitting here, just in case they got to do a little bit more, because Jane'Zar is actually not too bad in this matchup because she rerolls wounds against characters, and all of these big knights are characters. So even though she's wounding on 5s, she gets full rerolls to wounds, which means she's wounding on approximately 55% of her attacks, and she hits on 2s with 8 attacks. So, I mean, generally speaking, she's hitting like 7 times, and she's going to be wounding like 4-ish of them. So it's not too bad with AP 3. They don't get their invuln saves in melee. So it's actually a really solid set of attacks into the knights. And so that's why she's basically positioned here just in case they have to play cleanup. And if they don't, then they can possibly be on the objective. And if they get charged, opponent may shoot them. But at this point, we just have to make sure that these 2 knights die. So that is goal number 1 and 2, and it's just too important to make sure that these knights die. We are willing to absolutely overcommit, because I don't want to consider average dice here. When you're dealing with units that are this expensive and units that do this much damage each, we have to make sure that they are lifted. We can't allow them to survive. It's just too important that they actually go down, that I don't want a 55% chance that we kill them. I don't want a 60%. I want it to be somewhere in the 90% that we are taking these units out. It is a dice game, so you can never be 100% sure. But I basically want to put so much into them that it's extremely unlikely that they survive. And we've done all the right units into the right targets, as I mentioned before. So this is basically the setup. It's why I did it. I hope that's enough of an explanation for you. There's all sorts of little tiny details that could be kind of picked apart, but for the most part, that kind of explains the general idea of why everything was placed where it was. So this is just a real quick view. It's a kind of a cool cinematic view. You have all 5 of these big knights here just working their way up the board, and the Eldar just absolutely doing focus on this side of the map and countering them. They look like a whole bunch of little ants trying to deal with these giant monsters coming up the board. And then, of course, we have our little set of guys over here trying to stop our opponent from taking this side or taking this objective. So kind of a neat little picture, but wanted to give you another angle so you can kind of see, there's nothing left in this ruin. There's nothing in this ruin. There's nothing in this ruin. And we have our little Warwalker sitting back here being as safe as possible. Another thing that people constantly talk about is keeping their Warwalker alive. The Warwalkers die really fast. Again, his whole job is to boost these units, and that's exactly what he's doing. And he's doing it pretty safely. Our opponent's going to have a really hard time getting anything to shoot back into this Warwalker. Of course, he may be able to get, like this guy to move up and eventually get enough of a line where he might be able to shoot the Warwalker. But even then, they only have like 10-inch move, these despoilers. So I don't know, even with 10 inches, if he actually could get a line of sight on the Warwalker. So the Warwalker's pretty safe. I think the only one, this one may move over this way probably and then could get a line. But he's pretty safe, and if he's willing to just throw another despoiler in front of my army, I mean, we'll take that too. And so this is the result of the shooting phase and the charge phase, because you can see that Jane'Zar and the Banshees ended up here. So, mission accomplished. Lancer is gone. Rampager is gone. And we are on this objective to stop him from scoring. We have stopped him from sticking this objective by getting our 6-0C on there. And so, effectively, we've brought our opponent back down to just scoring on one objective right here. That means he's only going to score 5 points on primary. So, even though we are not necessarily great at holding primary, we can be really good at stopping our opponent from scoring it as well. And so this is basically what happened in the turn. We were able to bring down 2 knights, which means we're scoring 20 points in secondaries this turn, which is a huge flip. We also scored 5 on primary for holding this objective. Our striking scorpions, of course, scoring us the points on that objective, and then they moved this way with an advance. And so mission has been accomplished, and we did overkill it. We had plenty of damage to spare. The fire dragons and the mortal wounds from the swooping hawks and Lycus and the Farseer actually did some damage. Everything kind of came together and we were able to take him out without a problem. And in fact, I think I was even able to shoot the swooping hawks into the Rampager. And I believe the Dark Reapers actually were able to take shots into this. I think they actually completely bounced and did no damage. But it was nice that we had actually done enough damage to take out the Rampager that we could even start shooting some of the other targets with some of our other units. And so the Bright Lance as well, because we only had like 2 wounds left on the Rampager or something like that when we were shooting with the squad, I think. The Bright Lance actually was able to shoot either into this target or maybe it was into this guy. I don't remember off the top of my head now. It may have been this target unless he was out of range, in which case it was this one. It doesn't really matter, but we did send the Bright Lance into another target just to try to start chipping down more into the other targets because we knew we were going to take out that Rampager. But all in all, you see that our plan worked, and then the Howling Banshees did a couple wounds to this. I think they only ended up doing 5, but I think on average they actually do around 7, if I remember correctly. My math is like 6 or 7 because of Jane Czar's reroll wounds. And then what you want to do is use an aspect token and push it through on the Exarch, who has a damage 3 weapon. And with their AP 3 damage 3, you are effectively giving the knight a save on a 6 or else he's taking 3 damage. So you can actually punch through a respectable amount of damage with the Howling Banshees. But the reason I charged them in was he has a chainsword and it's actually a pretty effective melee weapon. But the Howling Banshees have 4-up invulns in melee, and I really want them to survive his melee attack because these knights here are prone to having issues by getting tagged because they do not have a way to fall back and shoot or fall back and charge. Now he can just stand there and shoot some weapons, but he's not on an objective, and so it's going to cause a real problem for him where he's not going to want to stand there, and he would almost rather move than just take his shots that he doesn't really have shooting into much anything. He can't really see much because this ruin wall is actually really tall, and so he can't really see much, and he doesn't want to just let the Howling Banshees fight him again because they will actually do, like I said, a respectable amount of damage. So he's kind of in a bad spot there. And so what's important is we took out 2 big knights here and here, and we've tagged a 3rd. So what that means is our opponent is going to be extremely limited on the amount of damage he can do on his hitback because he's got this knight that's ready, and for sure we're going to take this damage, and there's not really much we can do about that fact. He can also get his little knights into the game. They can pop out and start taking shots. But I'll be honest, these little knights don't do much at all into our army. Their weapons are not geared for killing Aeldar. They're geared for killing like heavy infantry, and they have like autocannons and things like that. They're really not something that I'm worried about at all. I would much rather make sure these big deadly knights are taken out. And so I'm just basically ignoring these small knights for the time being. But again, our main plan has worked to where he's possibly not going to be getting much value out of this knight as far as like its shooting, attacking, and whatnot. And he's going to get value out of this knight. And then this knight down here has to make decisions on whether it joins trying to take out some of this blob or it tries to help itself with controlling this objective and taking out these units down here so that it can maintain its objective down here. So he's kind of now got some hard decisions to make. And so we've kind of taken the game instead of our opponent gave us some hard questions, and now we've answered, and now we've put our opponent in a spot where he's got to answer some pretty tough questions. So at the end of our opponent's movement and shooting, so I didn't add in here, and I forgot to take a picture of just the movement, but our opponent, this is the movement and then shooting. You can see that he fell back from the Banshees, and I did try to do, after he fell back, I moved, but it was not far enough. They were only able to get to like around here, and that allowed the little dogs basically to shoot at the Howling Banshees. And so basically between the shooting, the Howling Banshees were all killed down to Jane Czar, and after they shot Jane Czar, I actually moved Jane Czar again to put her in the way of this knight, because basically what I'm trying to stop is I don't want this knight, even though it's a pretty long charge, I don't particularly want the knight going into Eldrad's squad, because its tank shock could actually start to crush through a good chunk of the infantry, and I don't want to be kind of clogged up in melee against this knight. So Jane Czar standing here means that he can't charge this Eldrad squad or the Farseer squad, which he couldn't charge anyways because they're -2 to charge because of the Warlock, and I think it was just under 12 inches, so there was literally no way for him to make that charge. So the only charge target he really has is this Eldrad squad, and I didn't really want him heading that way, and if I can stop him from actually taking the objective, that would be pretty nice, because he doesn't have the best melee on this particular knight. This is one that does not have good melee, and so Jane Czar, I was hoping, might be able to survive, but unfortunately, you'll see here there's a little bit of an issue with trying to make that happen. But the opponent was able to shoot this knight here into the Fire Dragons and the Swooping Hawks, because he knew that those two units had done basically some of the highest amounts of damage into his knights. The opponent didn't want to shoot into the Guardian squads, because when you think about it, it's actually pretty tough for the knights to actually deal with these Guardian bricks, because the -1 to wound just makes it more annoying for them to actually try to kill, and -1 to wound helps them actually survive better than some of the other units, and he has to kind of cut through a whole bunch of chaff infantry that doesn't really matter before he gets to the meat, which would be the Bright Lance, the Farseer, and the Warlocks, of course. And then same for Eldrad's squad. He can cut through 8 of the Guardians before he starts getting to the fusion guns, the Warlocks, or Eldrad himself. And the shooting that they have, while good, isn't really designed to just take out like tons of infantry. I mean, the Gatling cannon can, but he knows that the biggest value he's going to get is killing the Fire Dragons and the Swooping Hawk. And it was the right decision, because he actually killed all the Fire Dragons, so Fuegan was by himself. I actually rolled pretty bad on my saves, and he did split fire. He put the Gatling cannon into the Hawks, and he put all the other weapons into the Fire Dragons, because Fire Dragons do have 3-up saves. So he put a lot of the AP weapons and his other firepower into the Fire Dragons. Did kill all of them but Fuegan, and I think Fuegan actually lived with full wounds, so he killed the Fire Dragons themselves perfectly, which is really unfortunate, because when the Fire Dragons are gone, Fuegan doesn't get reroll hits, wounds, and damage into vehicles anymore. So he actually loses a good chunk of power into vehicles when he doesn't have at least his Exarch buddy tagging along with him. So that was unfortunate. I was really hoping we'd be able to keep at least one Fire Dragon alive, but we were unable to, and unfortunately, we were inside 18 inches, and there was some Swooping Hawks here that were also within 18 inches, so there's no Psychic Shield that could be done. Of course, I was hoping that Psychic Shield would help us, and I also knew that if he did try to shoot at him with this knight, that this knight was not going to be able to get within 18 inches. We could Psychic Shield to make sure that we didn't lose anything else. But at the end of it all, when it was done and said, he killed 5 of the Hawks and he killed 5 of the Dragons. This knight fell back to get on the objective to try to keep me from scoring primary, because he knew one of his missions was to stop me from scoring primary. And so he did that and did not do any shooting or charging or fighting with that knight. And then this knight came out here so that he could get shots into the Warlock and then also shoot the Spiders, which he killed 2. And then he split fire some of his weapons into the Scorpions and killed 1, and was preparing to charge and basically take this objective back from me. And so you can see our plan worked. Basically, we made it so this knight didn't really do any damage back. This knight had to focus our little units that we really don't care that much about and aren't our damage dealers. So we don't mind him putting his heavy firepower into our weaker units that really aren't effective into him. And so we are pretty much accomplishing our goals. We pretty much were able to do exactly what we wanted, and we kind of made the opponent play our game, which is super important as Aeldari. You want the opponent to play the game that you're putting forth. We're going to use our speed, our mobility, and our damage to make our opponents make tough decisions, and hopefully those decisions will be things that will end up being detrimental to them, or basically a lose-lose situation, because if he doesn't focus this unit down, then he can't get this objective. But he does focus this unit. Well, he's not really damaging anything that's going to be hurting him. He really wants to get as much of his damage into these blocks over here. So it's really a lose-lose situation for him. And this is just one more angle picture, because again, it just looks kind of cool. I will say, on the board, it's neat seeing the knights just towering over these ruins and everything, just looking down on these little tiny Aeldari units, and it's just kind of a neat look, and just imagining these tiny Eldar trying to fight off these massive Chaos Knights. And, so far they've already taken 2 out, so they're doing a pretty good job. Okay, so the other thing that happened is he charged into Jane Czar, and I didn't get a picture of this, but he charged into Jane Czar, did tank shock, because he couldn't afford to fight her, because he actually probably wouldn't have killed her in melee. So he tank shocked her and got on this objective, and he charged into the spiders and scorpions and killed them both, and was able to take that objective. His gun actually did not kill the Skyrunner, and this Skyrunner was also left alone, so we actually still have both of our Skyrunners. Now, with all that in mind, so basically you can kind of see the game state. He's got this objective stickied. He is going to have this objective again because of this knight, and then now he also has this objective with 12 OC, so we're not scoring. Unfortunately, because he's on this objective as well, with this knight here moved onto this objective, we're not going to score any primary. So he was able to actually make us score 0 on our primary score, even after doing some pretty hefty damage into his knights. I mean, when you think about it, each knight's worth like 335, so we did, 670 points of damage to his army, which is getting around a third of his army, basically, that we just took out in turn 2. And so we definitely did some serious damage, but he did hit some of our heavy hitters. He hit their fire dragons, he damaged our hawks, but we still have a lot of our army left. We have a lot of resources, we have a lot of things that can still do damage to him, so we're still sitting okay. So we're at another interesting point, and this is a game where, again, we haven't won the game yet, and we got to figure out how to start winning on primary. We've taken out 2 knights, and we've damaged each of the knights pretty well. I believe we overwatched this knight when he moved with the Bright Lance, and I don't remember if the warlocks may have been able to be in range. I actually don't remember, but even if not, we overwatch because we want this Bright Lance, and we just want to make sure we're doing damage all the time, because it's our only secondary, is just to kill these big knights. So just absolutely send our damage into the knights whenever we can. And we also used Isha's Fury into one of the knights as well, and I can't remember if it was this one or if it was this one. But either way, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure you're using Isha's Fury pretty much every turn, and make sure you're overwatching often, and that will really help you just keep doing damage constantly to these knights, just wearing them down, because we gotta get them down from their 26 wounds down to 0. So use the stuff we got, and it will continue to help you bring them down. We're here, and we see our opponent's situation, and like I said, just imagine Jane Czar's not there, and he's sitting on the objective. What do we do now? So we've killed 2 knights, but he still has 3. And we've chipped each of them down a little bit. Some of them down pretty significantly. And I think it's this knight down here is actually pretty low wounds. Like 17 or actually maybe a little bit less than that. But we actually have each of the knights at least partially damaged a little bit. And we have a situation where they are still really controlling the primary and pushing us off the primary. And we have to do something about that. We have to start gaining primary back or figuring out a way to gain our primary back. So if you're in this situation, what would you do here? Where would you attack? What would you do with your units? And how would you approach the situation? Remember, again, all we have is assassinate and bring it down for secondaries. And so how do we deal with the knights continuing to just pressure us, push in our face, sticky objectives, trying to keep us from scoring our primary, and just getting all their firepower into us next turn if we don't seriously do something about it. We don't have our fire dragons, really, our power is down with the fire dragons. Our swooping hawks aren't going to be doing as much. They've been cut in half. So how do we approach this? Where do you put your units? What do you attack? And how do you make the most out of this next turn? Because this next turn could be the game-winning turn. We can still win or lose the game based on our decisions here. So it's not over yet. We definitely hurt our opponent bad, and he hit us back pretty well, but definitely not as well, I think, as he would have liked. We did a lot more points of damage than he did. So how do we take this lead and basically clinch the game? Because that's what you want to do. If you have a resource lead and you're really ahead of your opponent when it comes to firepower and army, you got to take advantage of that situation and get the most out of it to make sure you go ahead and actually win the game. Because being inactive and not making good decisions with your units can still lose you the game even if you have a lead. So definitely think about it for a second. Think about what you do with Fuegan by himself, with the Hawks, with Lycus and the Spiders. They're still all there. The Void Reavers, both Guardian squads, the Dark Reapers, the Warwalker. We still have all these resources to use, but how do you effectively deal with these knights? Because each one of them, let's just say for the sake of ease, they've all been chipped down to around 20 wounds, and let's say this one at the bottom, let's say he's down more to 14 or so. So how do we deal with some still pretty healthy knights and then one that's slightly damaged? And just take a moment to think about that, and then I'll show you my plan and what I ended up doing. All right, so movement. The Corsair Void Reavers are going to be on the objective and ready to throw grenades and do whatever they need to do, try to make sure this knight goes. This was the healthiest knight here. I do remember that. This knight here had the most wounds. I think it was still sitting in like the low 20s. This one had taken some damage, and this one had taken a significant amount of damage. So we move Fuegan, and Fuegan sitting here with the way his weapon is held, he actually can see this knight and this knight. So now we have two options to shoot with Fuegan, and even though he doesn't have rerolls, he's still hitting on 2s, and he's wounding on 3s. So still going to do some serious damage, and we're able to get within 9 inches of both knights. So this knight's we're also within 9 inches of. So he is going to get Melta if he does end up getting it through their 5-up invuln. And so that's really nice. We also put the +1 to wound on this knight because it was the healthiest, and that actually means that Fuegan is hitting on a 2 and now wounding on a 2. So it's very likely against that knight that we actually punch through the damage, and that is the healthiest knight. So ideally, we'd like to use Fuegan. We didn't get to use the aspect token, unfortunately, because all the dragons died before we used it. Because when we killed the Lancer, we didn't even need it. So it kind of was unfortunate, but we lost our aspect token value. But, sometimes it happens. We set up the Dark Reapers to be able to shoot this knight and also shoot down the line into this, because this is actually their ideal target. So if you're playing a player that gets a little more aggressive with the small knights, the Dark Reapers with their strength 10 love shooting the toughness 9 little war dogs. On average, they're not going to kill it by any stretch, but you could probably expect it to do somewhere around 5 wounds. And if you use your aspect token, that probably pushes it closer to that 6 or 7. And so we're probably going to be doing some damage. Hopefully we can cut this thing about in half, but we're definitely not planning to destroy it. We've moved Eldrad and the Storm Guardians onto the objective to sticky it, put a whole bunch of OC on it so that we make sure our opponent knows there's no way he's scoring, and then we're also probably going to be scoring on it on our turn and sticking it at the same time, so that's huge. We're going to get value out of these Storm Guardians. We flicker jumped Lycus all the way over here so that she could shoot one of the knights for the hawks to get bonuses. The hawks never had to use their token, so they still have 2, which is really nice. And then Lycus is also staged to where she can charge into either knight to finish it off if it's low on wounds. So as you can see already, based on the things I've been saying, our plan is to try to kill all 3 knights this turn. It's pretty ambitious, but between this one being low, this one being kind of mid wounds, and then this one up here being pretty healthy, but what we're trying to do is just make it so that we are definitely killing these 2. That's our primary goal. Secondary goal is hope we can take this one out as well. But the biggest thing is we take out these 2 knights down here. That means that we max out our secondary guaranteed, and then it's a matter of primary game. But if we kill both of these knights, and the reason why these 2 knights are more important is because that allows us to control the board. Because our opponent, sure, he has a big knight, but that big knight's up here, and his war dogs are up here. So basically, we've got it to where his whole army is just in this little section of the board once we kill these 2 big knights. And then our army now controls all the rest of the board. And so that is exactly what you want to do. What you don't want to do, for example, is kill like this knight and this knight as your focus, because the problem is now they have one in the center that can move either direction, and they have a war dog that can go to this one. They have a war dog that can head to this one, and now he can also go to either this objective or he can go down to this objective. So it doesn't limit our opponent nearly as much as if we focus down what he has down here. We really just make it so all he's got is some units up here, which means that he can't even get to this objective down here. And we can fight for these other objectives because he just doesn't have the resources to get enough units on it. And so that is exactly our plan, to eliminate more resources of our opponent, but also make it so that he's kind of just sticking in one little corner of the board. And so again, we have our +1 to wound from the Farseer targeting this knight. We have the whole Guardian squad. All the Warlocks are within 12 inches. So we have all the firepower ready to go into this one, and it's already injured. And the Swooping Hawks did some mortal wounds to this one here to try to make sure that it would also be taken out. And then basically what we're going to do is we're going to shoot everything we have into this knight. And actually, funny enough, putting the Skyrunners like this, they actually boost each other. So now they're going to strength 6, which allows them to wound the big knight on 5s instead of 6s, because their destructors are strength 5 naturally, but when they're close to each other, it boosts to strength 6. And so now we're actually winning on 5, so it's actually doubling our damage into this knight with these Warlocks, which was actually kind of funny. They actually rolled pretty well and did a nice several wounds into this knight. And then we did roll pretty well with our Farseer Guardians as well, shooting in this knight. I knew this one was basically just going to be gone, almost guaranteed, because we had the Warwalker as well. And so the Warwalker was able to smack him, and then with all this AP1 stuff going to AP2, and we're in a way to where he's not getting any cover, it just really means that he's not gonna make it. So we have this one almost guaranteed, and of course we have our 2 units here as backup to deal with in case dice just go sideways. They can put some things in here, or Lycus can charge there or whatever. And then the Hawks, can shoot this guy. Lycus will help them. And we also have, of course, Eldred's Warlocks. Everybody's within range. The fusion guns are within Melta if they need it, if we need to go into this. I also positioned the fusion gun so they could shoot this knight as well. With a +1 to wound, it's really nice. And then also the Warlocks are in range to hit either knight, because this +1 to wound is a huge damage boost. And since this is the healthiest knight, I really wanted to make sure we had the best chances of really actually taking him out, even though I wasn't putting as much firepower into him as I was these other knights. And so now that we have gone over the plan, let's take a look at what happened at the end of the shooting phase. Yes, we were pretty confident this knight was going to die, but it didn't. And it actually lived on 1 wound, funny enough. Again, dice can be dice, and sometimes that happens, but he ended up living on 1 wound. But we do have Lycus sitting right here, and I have every bit of confidence in the world that Lycus can charge, and this whole squad is going to do 1 damage to this knight, 99.5 5% of the time. We'll say it's almost guaranteed because I have an aspect token. Lycus has some very powerful hits with lethal hits, and the Exarch also is coming in with 10 attacks with lethal hits, and it's just not very likely whatsoever this knight is going to survive a charge from Lycus, and so I'm not too concerned with that. This knight is obviously gone, so the shooting killed it. We did significant damage to this knight. We did throw grenades, and unfortunately our grenades only did 1 damage, so that was a bit of a disappointment, and so we didn't get a lot of value from that CP, but you gotta do it. The grenades are helpful into this, so you know, sometimes you only get 1, but sometimes you'll get 4 or 5, and that is the way the dice go. But we still have 2 knights alive, 1 on 1 wound, and this knight up here was very low. Fuegan actually absolutely trashed him. We hit with Fuegan, wounded with Fuegan, he failed. Fuegan rolled a 5 for damage, did like 11 damage to this knight by himself, basically cutting it in half because I think it was sitting somewhere in that 22 to 24 wound range. So Fuegan alone just kind of cuts him in half. So a lot of the shooting was actually able to go into this knight because we were able to finish this knight off with, I think, the Swooping Hawks and Lycus. And so that was really nice. I think we did put 1 Warlock into this knight and then the other one into this knight. And I was very surprised, but the Warlocks rolled really well. I actually remember specifically I rolled a 6 for the number of attacks for that Warlock and a 6 for that Warlock. So we actually ended up getting 8 attacks into each knight with the Warlocks there, with the Destructors. And the +1 to wound, it was significant, actually did a good amount of damage. And this Warlock also is part of the reason this knight had died without needing more firepower to go into it. We were able to put the fusion guns into this knight and a lot of other things to where this knight is now, I think, down to 3 wounds is actually where it got down to. So we have a knight on 3 wounds, we have a knight on 1 wound, and we killed 1, so we're sitting really good. And we know that this is basically a guaranteed, and we still have Fuegan that can charge, and we have the Void Reaver that can charge as well. So we fight, and Lycus finishes him off, and I charge in with both Fuegan and the Void Reavers, and I gave the Void Reavers a chance to finish him off, and with 4 rerolls to hit and +1 to wound, they actually did it themselves. They didn't even need Fuegan. Fuegan didn't do anything. The Void Reavers got the last hit on the last big knight, so that was a nice little epic win for the Void Reavers. I think that's the biggest thing for me that they've ever been able to take out. So that was awesome. Their power swords were kind of funny because you're hitting on 3s with rerolls, and sure, you're wounding on 6s normally, but then with Doom, they're wounding on 5s, and so with their AP, you're putting the opponent on 5-up saves with your swords, and so we actually got a good amount of the sword attacks in there, and it was enough to finish off the knight. So after this, I mean, basically here the game is in essence over, right? Because, I mean, when you look at what we still have left, our Guardians haven't even been touched. We have Dark Reapers that he knows is going to finish off these knights between all this, and the Dark Reapers had already cut this knight, this little guy, down to about 7 wounds. I think they did get him down to 7 wounds. We still have our Warwalker that's got Bright Lance, Missile Launcher, which both are going to be really bad for his little knights. We have Lycus and the Spiders, who themselves could easily do 7 damage into a little knight by hitting it and charging it. And we just have so much that he knows that these 2 little knights are dead next turn. But we'll just take a real quick look at what happened in the next turn for the end of the game. So he moves and shoots and charges. He's trying to get on this objective. He had drawn, I believe it was Establish Locus and like Cleanse. And so he redrew and ended up getting like Extend Battle Lines. And so he was just trying to score anything he could, get the most score he could. He did end up scoring Secure No Man's Land and Overwhelming Force in the last turn as well. I forgot to mention that, his secondaries. So he actually scored 10 on secondaries, and it looked like he was going to dominate the primaries, but we just completely annihilated all 5 knights, scoring us a max score on our secondaries. And so he charged in here, trying to score the best he can. He put this knight here and shot into our Hawks, brought them down to just the Exarch, and Baharoth was all that was left of the Hawks. But at this point, it's just nothing's going to work. I mean, Lycus is going to come in here. The Storm Guardians are going to come up. The Farseer squad's probably going to Uncharted Truth wherever, and these knights be able to get shots on both knights, and they're just not going to make it. So next turn they lose. So the opponent and we called it here, and I did finish out scoring because basically once we clear him out, we score 15 points for each on primary each turn, and so we scored 15 on the 4th battle round and 15 on the 5th, and so we ended up getting 35 on our primary and a perfect score on our secondary, of course, by taking out, again, all we had to do is take out 4 big knights. For a total of 85, our opponent, we only allowed him to score 5 points on primary, which was like amazing, because I was really not thinking that would be the case based on how many things that he had sticky objectived. But he did score 14 on the secondaries, and so he ended up scoring 30. And so we had an 85 to 30 game. Now, I was absolutely shocked at how effectively this list dealt with the Chaos Knights. I will say that I was rolling pretty good, and my opponent was rolling kind of average to, and he had some bad saves. He didn't roll as many 5-ups, I think, as would be normal, and so I think a little bit of luck went my way. But when you look at what happened and the score differential, and the fact that I overkilled his knights in most cases, it was really when I went to kill all 3, possibly on average dice, if I wouldn't have been able to get as much chip damage in with the Bright Lance on Overwatch, and if I wouldn't have rolled, 4 damage with Isha's Fury like twice in a row, which is average, but still, when you like really kind of consider some things, if a few things have changed, one of the knights lives. The thing is, like, even if one of the knights live, he's still not winning this game. There's absolutely no way that one knight is dealing with this unit, backed up by the Warwalker, and we'll still have the Warp Spiders. Fuegan's still coming up and down, not really doing much mortal wounds, but going to be doing lethal hits, just absolutely doing chipping damage. Fuegan's still alive, able to do some crazy damage, and we can still Uncharted Truth him within melter range with no problem. And actually now that he would actually be out of melter range, now that I think about it, but he could probably advance and still get within melter range. And we have enough of these guys left to hold OC. There's 3 of them, so even if he stickies an objective or whatever, basically it doesn't really matter. Like, even if the dice were more average and maybe he had a knight live one turn longer, I don't think the game, it could have been 80 to 40, but I don't think there's any way that he wins this match the way it went. And so I think it was a really good show of, regardless of the fact that he pushed the knights and forced me to make a decision, because if I wouldn't have killed the knights, then he just, the Rampager moves and charges in and absolutely wrecks like some units. His Lancer moves and charges in and kills some units, and meanwhile, his other knights are staging up in the center here and basically just shooting in, and it just would have been a terrible situation. I had to go aggressive, in my opinion. And the fact that we were able to kill 2 knights pretty handedly, I mean, like, it wasn't really even close that we weren't going to kill them. I mean, I had plenty of firepower left over after killing those 2 knights, but we had to kill them. And the other knights, we killed 3 knights in the next turn, so I was kind of thinking, if I can just kill 1.5 knights a turn, that'll be good, because I just got to kill 4. But no, we killed 2 comfortably, and then 3 in the turn after. Made me feel really good about this list. I mean, the damage output of this list is just shocking. I mean, it really shocked my opponent. I mean, obviously, he's sending these big knights up thinking that they're going to survive, and there's too many targets for me to actually kill enough of them that he's not going to just mow down my army. And that is just not what happened at all. We were able to take out plenty. And so I hope this gives you guys some ideas about how to fight the knights, and also maybe be a little more confident in the Aeldari units and their capability of doing enough damage to kill the knights. And if you look specifically at the units that I attacked with, and I kind of explained it some, why I went in with the Fire Dragons into 1, why the Hawks would come down to do mortal wounds. A lot of that was very focused on the type of knight it was, to make sure that I'm putting the best weapon profiles into each target. And, even though Fuegan and the Fire Dragons technically would probably want to go into a target that doesn't have such a good invuln save, I really wanted their melta damage to be able to punch through and not worry about his damage blank, and also just make sure that thing died, because it was a very dangerous unit. And so I wanted the fire dragons to make sure that they got into that target. And so, yeah, just make sure you're staying focused on what the knight is, what its invuln save is, and just line your units up. Make sure you're getting good use out of +1 to hit, +1 to wound. Make sure you're getting the Warwalker to support your Guardian squads and the Hawks, or both in some cases. I think this game kind of proves the concepts of this list, and even into an extremely durable, high wound, high toughness, good saves, invuln saves. No matter what your opponent throws at you, if you combine the firepower of these units correctly, you can take things off the board. All right, so some final thoughts. I would probably generally start everything on the board so you can get a strong alpha and threaten the opponent that if you do go full bore in front of me, I will be able to come and hit you with everything I got, starting from the very beginning of the game. Without really much indirect, and I think there's some knights that have a bit of indirect here and there, but there's not really any scary indirect. They're generally not going to be deep striking anything, so there's not much of a reason to put anything in reserves. You could maybe put Fuegan in reserves, but I think in this case it would probably be a mistake, because we really want Fuegan to get his whole unit into Melta range. And so that means you're either spending a CP on rapid ingress, or you're skipping out on Fuegan for a turn, basically just setting him up and then getting him ready to advance and shoot or whatever it might be. And so I think it actually is better to start Fuegan on the board, because you can always untrought truth him if you need to, but ideally he's going to be in a spot where he can advance and then get all their shooting off in Melta range. The second thing I want to mention is focus down the biggest threats if possible. So some of the knights are better at killing mass amounts of infantry than others. Like that Rampager has a massive amount of melee attacks that just melt infantry, like all of our infantry units. He could probably kill multiple at the same time. The Rampager needed to go, and he had an advance and charge threat. He was fast, so that was a huge threat. The fact that he could advance and charge and do so much damage, and he's one of the fastest knights, I wanted him taken out. And unfortunately for us, in the case of the knights, a lot of their units are good at killing a lot of our units. But I knew that really some of the biggest threats was the shooter, because the blast attack of the thermal lances and the Gatling cannons was a lot of firepower, so that knight was really dangerous. And the two melee knights also were capable of doing significant amounts of damage, because, like I mentioned, the Lancer has, in essence, a free tank shock. And knights, that's one of their things. They charge in, they tank shock, and then they pile into something else and they mow it down. And so you got to be really careful dealing with these knights that have really powerful melee, because they're not only going to melee you to death, you have to remember that tank shock, because that tank shock could easily be 5-6 mortal wounds into a target. Lastly, Isha Fury, Overwatch, grenades is really what allowed us to kill 3 big knights in a single turn. The fact that Isha's Fury was just, 3 wounds here, 4 wounds there, and then I think another one I rolled 3. I think it was like 3-4-4 or 3-4-3, something like that. But either way, we were doing mortal wounds as much as we could with Isha's Fury. It's a fantastic stratagem. And Overwatch with that Bright Lance was just working, because the thing is that Bright Lance is AP3, so even when they're in cover, you're putting them on their invuln. And that Bright Lance, if you're overwatching basically any turn you can, at least 3 times throughout the game, 2 out of those 3 times is going through, and that means that your opponent is going to be taking some serious damage. D6 plus 2 each of those times it does go through. And so definitely be focused on making sure you're getting Isha's Fury off as much as you can. You're getting good Overwatch off. The Hawks could actually be pretty good into them as well, because of all the lethal hits. It's not going to be amazing, but they are saving on 3s and not 2s, so they will take some damage. But ideally, that Bright Lance is the one that can really just do some punchy damage on Overwatch. And then, of course, if your Warlocks happen to be in range, they're wounding on 5s, and they're probably going to punch a little bit through as well. So because we were constantly doing damage to our opponent, even on their turn, I actually made that joke because in my first turn, I did 3 damage total, I think, to one of the knights with the Reaper launchers, and that was it. And now that I think about it, I think that Bright Lance actually bounced on the first turn. And so I think I did 3 damage total. And I kind of made a joke that on his turn, when he moved forward and Aisha Furied one target and Overwatched another, I ended up doing more damage on his turn to him, because I think the total damage I did was something like 11 damage between the Bright Lance and Isha's Fury. I did more damage on his turn than I did on my own turn. So make sure you're getting good value out of what we can do on our opponent's turn with these stratagems and these abilities, because that will allow you to set up a turn like we had in our third turn where we took out 3 knights, because you're not going to take out 3 full health knights. Like, that's extremely unlikely. As much as, you know, I'm saying this list is great at damage, don't expect to kill 3 big knights in one turn. That's just way too ambitious. 2 is definitely achievable, as was proven. We can definitely do 2 knights even at full wounds if done correctly, but 3 is just not going to happen unless you've chipped them all down, you know, at least probably about a third or a half. It's still going to be tight, but that's where we can actually kill 3 in one turn, and that's just going to absolutely turn the game upside down and make it so that your opponent cannot come back. That's basically it. Again, this was a kind of a quick and dirty battle report. Sorry it's not quite as polished. It's just one that I wanted to get out and let people know that, you know, we can handle the knights. We can deal with these type of targets. We can do enough damage to take them out. And so feel confident in what we're able to do, but make sure you do it smart. You know, we didn't try to alpha strike turn 1. We waited for him to spread out and get in some positions to where, hey, we can take out 2 targets and we can make it so that he can't hit us back as hard as he would like. And that's the turn to go. We're going to go ahead, get in there and do maximum damage. And so just really be patient, wait for that right time. And then when you do it, fully commit and make that decision. And I think what you'll find is that you're probably going to make mistakes now and then and commit on turns when you shouldn't have, or it doesn't go the right way. And what you need to do is think about and make sure you're separating the bad dice from bad decisions. Because if you do something and go very aggressive and you just roll nothing but 1s, 2s, and 3s for everything, you know, sometimes the dice can make a turn go bad. But that's the last thing that I would kind of try to blame. I would focus more on, did you put the right units into the right targets? Did I get my fire dragons into what I wanted to? Did I get the hawks combined firepower with the warwalker into the target I wanted to, etc.? So think more on that when you go aggressive. Did I do the right plays when I went aggressive? That's maybe why you failed. But also, maybe it was just not the right time. Maybe the opponent had it exposed enough. Maybe you were trying to be too aggressive or expect too much of our firepower. And so what will happen though is if you fully commit and you just make the decision and you do it, you will learn over the course of games about when going aggressive was the correct move and that you did it on the right turn. Because you will get pretty immediate feedback. If you go aggressive and then your opponent wipes out so much of your army that you just lose the game basically after that turn, well, you probably went on a turn that you shouldn't have. But if you go aggressive and you wipe out so much of the opponent's army that they can't come back from it, then you probably picked the right timing. And so make sure that, again, when you commit, go after it, really put the pressure on your opponent, make them make hard decisions, put them in bad places and lose-lose situations. And as you do this more and get more practice applying this pressure, you will improve in your tactical and strategic analysis and your ability to not only just analyze the battlefield, but actually see these opportunities. And that comes with just playing more and practicing and trying to be aggressive. That is, you know, sometimes you have to do a little bit of trial and error, And after playing some games and getting comfortable about what your units are capable of on a highly reliable basis, that's when you can start to do some really awesome alpha strikes and really game-changing turns, and you'll be more and more successful. So I wish you all the best of luck in your games. I hope this was helpful. I hope this kind of shows the capability of Eldar, and specifically, of course, the Seer Council detachment into Knights, and proves that we do have the firepower to handle it. And again, I just want to point out, I only had 5 fire dragons. 5 with Fuegan, of course. But that was it. And my opponent even said, I don't think you have enough fire dragons to handle the Knights. And I said, I don't know. I may not, and I might have to start putting 10 fire dragons on my list, but let's try it out and see what happens. And so this was a bit of a learning point for me too, because I've not played this matchup yet. But after that matchup, I still feel very comfortable and confident that 5 fire dragons and Fuegan is just fine. And I can handle, if I can handle 5 large Chaos Knights with just Fuegan and 5 fire dragons, I can probably handle most anything when it comes to making sure I can take out large, tough threats. So yeah, this was a great test of the list and a great proof of concept. I hope it helps you with your decision making and this matchup. Let me know if there was anything that you thought was done that could have been different, or if you feel like you've tried something like this and it just didn't work out for you. I love hearing about your guys' experiences. And I've had some awesome comments in some of the other videos of people talking about some different ideas that they had when they were kind of paused the video and kind of thought about how they would handle it. There's a lot of ways to play this game, and that's one of the things that makes it so great is, you know, this is just the way I went about this matchup, but it doesn't mean it is the right way to do it. It is one of the ways to do it that worked and was successful, but there's definitely different styles of play. And so don't, again, feel like, oh, I have to play like that because he's having success. Like, a lot of this is because the list I've tailored is to my play style, and I am very comfortable with these units now. I'm very comfortable with the list that I've built. I've played it enough. I've put it through the reps to where I can play it into pretty much any faction with confidence. This is something that may be different for you, like, and definitely feel free to take the list that I've built, try it yourself, and if something isn't feeling right, if it's just not lining up with your style of play, that's where you can start making changes. But I encourage you to only change one unit at a time. So maybe if you feel like I need more fire dragons, so I'm going to take out, you know, the Dark Reapers, or I'm going to take out or downgrade, you know, maybe the Striking Scorpions, or take out that Warlock and then take out another unit. Whatever it is, whatever it ends up being, and you move things around and maybe downgrade the Scorpions to Rangers, whatever it is, just make sure you're not making too many changes at one time so that you can really assess whether that change is having a big effect or not. And the other thing is, you also have to be willing to play a few games with those changes, because, for example, like the Warwalker, I've really been putting the Warwalker to the test. I've played a lot of games with it. And now that I've played with it for quite a few games, I am very confident that the Warwalker is absolutely worth the points. His value is significant for the points that he is now. He is very good. Make small changes and test it multiple times, because in this example, if you took a Warwalker into Daemons, you're not going to be impressed by it. You're just not going to get a great sense for what the Warwalker's for and what it's good at. And so you might be thinking that it's not a great unit, but as soon as you start running it into some things like Custodes and maybe some Space Marine lists that have a lot of 2-up save vehicles, you know, some dreadnoughts, all of a sudden you start seeing, wow, this Warwalker is doing a lot of work. And if you just base it on one game, after you make one change, you can make the wrong decisions, is really what it comes down to. So just keep all that in mind when you're trying out lists and you're making changes. And I wanted this to be a quick battle report, and now I'm going off on some tangents, but I'm just really trying to put out some thoughts out there for you guys, really trying to help people understand how to kind of think through these things and why you are analyzing your units as you play the game so that you can keep tailoring the list to how you play. And that's really where you're going to have the most fun. Because Seer Council, great detachment, different ways to play it, different lists you can find. Make sure that you end up playing the list that you like with the units you like that feels best to you, because that's where the game is fun. And that is, at the end of the day, the most important part. We all love to win. It's great to be competitive and want to win, but we really do this for something to do that's enjoyable. And so make sure you are enjoying the game and you're doing it with the units and the models that you like and love to put on the table. So with all that said, I'll let you guys get out of here. I hope this was a useful battle report. I hope this gives you guys confidence in the Knights and to kind of think about some of these synergies that you might, again, not take this exact list, but maybe it'll give you some ideas of putting something in there. You know, maybe taking one of the Guardians bricks that you haven't tried before, or taking the Warwalker when you haven't tried them. Hopefully I get you guys to try this stuff out, do a little bit of experimenting, and let me know if you do in the comments below. But thanks again for listening, for watching. Thank you guys so much for your support on Patreon. I do want to do a quick shout out to the people on Patreon that are supporting. So I want to give a shout out to Brandon, Ashley, Brian, and John. Thank you guys so much for your support on Patreon. It means a lot to me that there are people out there that are getting enough value out of this that they feel like they want to support the channel. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you guys continue to get good value out of this and that I can continue making content that helps everybody with becoming a more competitive player in 40K and enjoying this hobby. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you guys in the next one.